What's going on? Welcome to day one of the Music Licensing Challenge. Just wanted to drop in really quick and share some tips and tricks that we've learned over the years when it comes to working with sync and working with briefs. So, the first thing I want to look at is actually reading the brief carefully and kind of figuring out what the client is looking for, and from there, kind of narrowing down the options, because that is one of the things that can be kind of stressful when it comes to working to brief on a tight deadline, is that it might be a lot of options but very little time. So you need to kind of make some decisions really quickly and just get started, because that is one of the biggest pitfalls for me personally, is that I spend too much time trying to find the perfect starting point without actually starting. So for me, the most crucial part is just to get going in some kind of direction as soon as possible, not just sitting there feeling overwhelmed, feeling stressed, just trying to figure out the perfect idea before even starting. So what helps that process for me is to narrow down the options a little bit. So what we can see here is that we need to have an energetic rhythm, a good beat to drive the footage forward without being too hectic or overly fast. So since I know that is an essential part of the track, I would definitely not be making some kind of elegant, slow piano ballad with strings, with sweeping string lines. So that kind of is out of the question, even though you could have more elegant, prestigious kind of tracks for certain car commercials, but this is not what they're looking for in this case. And it also says that spot either needs to have subtle positivity without being cheesy, which naturally rules out any kind of upbeat ukuleles and whistling and, very upbeat corporate jingle type things, which of course wouldn't really fit a luxury premium car brand or anything like that to begin with. But I'm just stating the obvious, and it needs to feel, or it can feel, cinematic but not feeling over the top. So maybe massive brass statements with lots of choirs and things like that is not going to be the way to move. So it seems like this brief might be looking for something a little bit more unique and subtle, but that still has a hint of something that's either cinematic or positive and driving, but not being too obvious and cheesy. So they're also mentioning that it should feel like something that hasn't been used a million times before. So you want to stay away from different cliches and overused elements in whatever style you're choosing to do. And this can be liberating, knowing that they're not just looking for the same kind of thing over and over, so you have a little bit more freedom to be a little bit more creative and so on. And then what we have written here in some of the guidelines is that use your own strengths in producing this track. So depending on what your strengths are in terms of styles, you might be having a background from playing guitar and playing rock music. Maybe it's electronic music. Maybe it's something completely different. It's more sound design driven. No matter what it is, try to use your strengths to create something that is unique, but still having these elements in mind. So what I kind of tend to do is to figure out just a starting point and just get going. So it could be playing around with different rhythms to begin with, maybe finding different rhythm loops, maybe going through different sound designs of pulses, and figuring out just some kind of backbone. And then I tend to use a sketching template of some kind where I have, say, full chords, bass, might have some ostinatos or something like that, or a melody layer and some pads. And then with these major building blocks, I will try to sketch out a few different ideas with just a few layers each, and play around with maybe a few different tempos, a few different sound palettes. And then once I find something that to me kind of fulfills the criteria of the brief, I will select my favorite idea and then going down that path to completion, essentially. Another piece of advice as you're composing and as you're trying your ideas out is to actually look up other similar commercials, similar car commercials, and of course listening to the music that's in there, but actually muting the music and audio in those commercials and playing your tracks and your ideas over them to see if your tracks actually kind of fits the visuals and holds the space for the commercial. And another thing to remember that is extremely important in all kinds of sync and licensing is understanding that you are not the main hero of this story. You're trying to create a track that's going to serve the editor or serve the creator or client in this campaign. So your track needs to be simple enough that it can function underneath, say, a voiceover and as a part of a commercial. So you're not trying to create a track that is inspired by fast cars where you're featuring all the most crazy textures, ostinatos, and counter melodies that you could possibly pull off to showcase your technical skill. That would not be the move. You want to make sure that you're actually enhancing the story and enhancing the commercial that you haven't even seen yet. So there's a certain level of minimalism that usually helps with that, to make sure that there's space for voiceover. Playing the ads with muted audio, playing the tracks over really helps to just see if your track fits into this universe. So that's one thing that I really recommend doing as you are playing around with different ideas. So those are some of my personal tips. Let's see what Joshua has to say. So when it comes to getting a brief like this, whether there are reference tracks or not, what are the first steps that you're taking to, how do you attack it essentially?
How I normally attack things is I read the brief slowly, look for the key words that describe what they're looking for the most, you know, and then I start looking for sounds in my library that achieve those different points. So if it's epic and dark and choral, or you know there's choir involved or something they want like that, then I'll be looking for those different sounds in my library and create a custom folder that I copy those sounds into, that I can make the track out of. That helps a lot, and that's a lot of fun on a brief. So kind of build my own toolkit. That
is a great point actually, to just narrow down the options so it's not as overwhelming and you can actually just get going.
Yeah, and sometimes there's some happy accidents where different samples from different sound packs in my set of libraries work really well together, and you find those kind of things happen, which is nice. So this is like a new sound that you create from that, so get to it quickly.
Perfect. Now that's great advice. So I think read the brief carefully, figure out what they want and also what they don't want, because in the brief it's also talking about not being overly cheesy or overly over the top cinematic. So you know, maybe stay away from the choirs and the too upbeat kind of corporate jingly kind of feels and the things like that. Figure out what they don't want, because
that also means like the melodies aren't too complex and there's not too much of a lyrical, like you're not trying to tell a story too much with the melody as much as you're just trying to give off a feeling of driving, like a fun edge, which is a different thing melody wise. Yeah,
that's also one of the key things that's just essential, that you're creating the bed for the commercial and not just something that's standing on its own legs.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, there's still going to be voiceover, most likely. There's still going to be what the actors are saying, and there's going to be sound effects, so there needs to be room for all those things. So it's really just about finding the most driving, interesting elements and putting them together where they don't distract from a few extra layers on top. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, I hope that was helpful, and we'll tap in again tomorrow with some more tips and tricks. We'll see you then.